This is Peter,
And this is Tom.
and you're listening to History Teachers Talking Podcasts. All right, this is Peter Zablocki and Thomas Reska, and welcome back to the podcast. What do we got, Tommy?
Well, today we're going to look into the causes and really talking about the U.S. involvement in the First World War. It's probably not talked about as much. It often gets overshadowed by obviously the Second World War, and a lot of the causes are kind of misconceptions out there about them.
Yep. And we'll kind of move past the causes as well. We'll talk about U.S. involvement as a whole in the conflict, and as well as kind of how the United States gets out of the conflict, and also what's happening at home in the United States during World War I. And I think, what you just said is very interesting. I think that has a lot to do with this idea of World War I not being as glorified or as popular, especially U.S. involvement in it, as much as World War II. I think that has a lot to do with Hollywood. I mean, there really isn't, right, that many movies about World
there's
War
not that
I.
many. Well, yeah, you obviously have 1917 recently came out, but that's
Amazing.
not. That has
But that's
nothing to
not
do with
US.
it. It has nothing to. Well, Americans weren't involved in it that long. Like we declare war, we get involved in 1917. Really don't get troops over by 1918. And the war is pretty much, we have a
Over
big
1918,
factor.
yeah.
Well, we have a huge factor. I mean, the American involvement is one of the reasons that the war ends.
Yeah.
But also, as we get into, like a lot of Americans felt that, and I'm not saying this is everybody, a lot of Americans felt that the country was almost duped by the British. Also, that was like a feeling of fighting in World War One. That's another reason why we kind of went to isolationists after that, and it leads into the effects that create World War II, basically.
Yeah. All right, so let's get going. Let's first of all, to prep for this episode, I thought to myself I'm like, okay, I know enough about World War I and U.S. involvement. I've taught it so many times. I'm sure you have as well. And I'm like, I don't need to review for this. I got this. And then like half hour ago, I'm like, okay, I've never not reviewed for any of these. So I'm like, I need to review something. So I did naturally what every history teacher would do. I literally picked up a U.S. history textbook, grabbed a highlighter, and like I was like, all right, because like I felt like I needed to like prep something as opposed to just going in cold here. So you know what? Good old history textbooks. It's come in handy sometimes.
Old school.
Old school. That's right. Although now they're trying to push all the textbooks to be all virtual and digital and stuff, and students are given a code now. But then I don't like that because then they can't highlight. I mean, they can, but it's PDF highlighting. It's not the same.
It's different. It's a different generation thing.
Yeah,
What are you gonna do? Don't stress.
Don't stress. That's right. Life is beautiful. All right, so causes of World War I. Let's just kind of quickly go into what caused the conflict itself.
Itself.
Quickly. And more commonly known at the time, due to the fact that no one knew there was going to be a World War II, this was known as the Great War, or also commonly known as the War to End All Wars.
And that's, I think, something really important to stress, and I always used to stress with my students, is it was being told to people that this was going to be the last war ever. Once it really starts to break out, right? This was going to be the last war ever. Because I guess to backtrack a little bit, the Europeans also kind of said that it was going to be a short war, right? Both sides thought they would win very quickly. They were telling the youth, and I say youth, like the soldiers on the fight, you want to be part of this war because you want to be able to tell your grandchildren stories that you fought in this last war ever, right?
Yeah.
And the Europeans really didn't have a major war since the Napoleonic era. And they kind of, the mindset was they need to have this war every once in a while, just kind of get it out of their systems. That was like the mindset going into what becomes World War I. And because they were using these old Napoleonic era tactics, but they were using these brand new
Modern
types
technology.
of weapons, these newer types of weapons, mostly like the machine gun, right? That they just did not mesh well.
Machine guns, tanks, I mean, submarines, like this is...
Yeah, and then that's one reason why it becomes this mindset to be the war to end all wars, because it was supposed to sour mankind's desire for war so much because it was so bloody. Obviously, it doesn't. 20 years later, they have a war that pretty much dwarfs World War I in almost every way.
Absolutely. So kind of real quick, I guess, to summarize it, cause of World War I, often when we teach it, I think we all break it down to nationalism, imperialism, militarism, and alliance systems. Nations, in particular European nations, have this like deeply influenced by this concept of nationalism, right? Like this devotion to the like interest and culture of one's nation. And this nationalism oftentimes led to imperialism, which was, and this was kind of going on for centuries before early 1900s, but
Future
you know,
podcast right there.
yeah, right. European nations have been kind of building these empires around the world, and there's a competition for these colonies around the world. And then, because of nationalism, like my nation's better above your nation, I deserve this land more so than you do. Also led to militarism, which is this the idea of like let's
Well,
develop
yeah,
these armed forces and use these armed forces as a tool of diplomacy. Like, look, I'm speaking from a position of
of
power, a
power.
position of
Yeah.
strength.
And they
Like,
also needed these big militaries to control these colonies that they were having
absolutely,
around the world. And some of the things that as one country made some new form of technology, like the dreadnoughts, right? Like the metal
yep,
clad ships and stuff, then other countries could too. And they said that was a big mistake that the British actually did because it kind of made, when they unveiled their first dreadnoughts, right? It made every navy in the world obsolete, basically, including their own. So that
yep.
new, like that numerical advantage they always had because they were like the British Empire,
Yeah.
they
No, they
lost
had the
it.
biggest navy in the world, but it was obsolete by
it,
1914.
it was
Absolutely.
obsolete, and you need, and everyone was just building these new ships now, and they kind of started from scratch. So you have a lot of these countries jumping in there, and the big rivalry that's really starting to come here, obviously, is going to be Britain and then Germany. This unified Germany, which is
Yep.
really trying to now go after Britain as the main power in Europe, the main influence in Europe. And what's crazy is they're aren't they related, right? The British and
The Germans?
the Germans in some way or form, like cousins. They're all kind of. I know the Russians
They're
and they
all
are.
related. That's another
They're all
thing.
related
So,
somehow. Yeah. No,
yeah,
they are
so
all related. Yeah.
they are. There's actually a great book about it. How this is
They're
one
all
big
cousins.
family
Yeah.
affair. Yep. But like kind of, I think this also segues a little bit into this alliance system where you
Yes.
had these different nations that set up these different alliances, and the Triple Entente, I guess, later known as the Allies, consisted of France, Britain, and Russia. Right? They were eventually known as the Allies, but they kind of set up their own alliance system,
Yeah,
and
and that's
then
big. I'm sorry to interrupt, but that I really
yeah,
always stress how important that was because one, now you have Britain and France teaming up, which
yep,
remember they fought 100 years war. It was actually 116 years, but they fought a war against each other that lasted for over a century. And these countries were always, rivals of each other. Now they're coming together. They're joining forces because they see how dangerous Germany is becoming, right?
yep,
And then by bringing Russia in, if you look on the map, right, which this was like we could kind of bring this up.
yeah,
Now that France and Russia are together, now Germany is surrounded on both sides. That's why they bring
hmm,
Russia into this fold that if a war does break out, Germany would now have to fight a two front war, and that's not going to be
which they
very
do.
successful.
Yeah,
Which they do, and they make plans for this, which we'll get into, I guess, a
yep,
little bit. But it's not that's not very easy to fight a two front war. It doesn't really
yep.
happen that often, and very few countries are successful with it.
Yep. The other major alliance was the Triple Alliance, which
Yeah,
eventually becomes actually the Central Powers, but it consists of Germany, initially Germany, Austria Hungary, and Italy.
Italy. Yeah,
And then Italy kind of hops out of that alliance, and what you have is Germany, Austria Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire,
Empire.
which forms the later known as the Central Powers. So let's kind of just quickly get into what makes the war break out, and then we'll get into kind of more or less how the United States gets involved in this.
Yeah, Archduke
1914.
Franz Ferdinand, right? He's the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne. And to give a
Yep.
little backdrop on him, he was not well liked in
Hmm.
Austria-Hungary. I mean, so I think his
Yeah.
wife, right, was not well liked.
Yep.
And but he gets killed in June of 1914. He was killed by a Bosnian revolutionary, right, from the Black
Yep.
Hand, and
Yep.
that basically sent off this chain of events that's going to lead
Uh,
to
no, wait. He was. I think he was in. Yeah, he was in Bosnia,
yeah,
and he was
Bosnia, yeah.
shot by a Serbian
Serbia,
nationalist.
that's what it was. Yes, in
Yep.
Bosnia, shot by a Serbian nationalist.
Yep.
What was the guy's name?
Gavrilo
Yeah,
Princip.
yeah, Fia Princip, and he winds up getting beaten and like tortured and stuff like that.
Yep.
Crazy. But the crazy thing about his, I don't know if you. I'm so sorry. I know I'm kind of
No, no, go,
going off
go.
a going off a tangent here, but I remember saying this is that they knew that there was going to be some plot, and Princip wasn't the only guy trying to kill the Archduke that day.
Yeah.
They actually threw a hand grenade at him that didn't go off earlier in the day.
Yep.
And it
At his
didn't go
car or
off.
something.
At his
Yep.
car, it rolled underneath his car. It just didn't blow up.
Yeah.
They're like, "Oh, okay." So a lot of his bodyguards like, "We should get back. It's not safe here." And he's like, "No, no, no. Let's keep on going." So they changed their route, right? And
Yep.
then the Pinsip apparently he stops. He was gonna shoot the guy, but then he stopped. He knew that they changed their course. So what happens? He stops at a place to buy not a hot dog, but something similar to that, like a sausage or whatever, like one of those side road
Yeah.
vendors. And as he's buying this and eating this sausage, he can kind of look through the alleyways and he can see that the Archduke is driving through this other alleyway. And he's like, "Oh, look, I still have my chance." So again, World War One is a ton of these like small little instances that just have to go perfectly right for what to happen to take place. Because if he
Yep.
doesn't stop at that sausage stand, or the Archduke doesn't like make the left instead of making a right, World War One, as we know it, happens differently or doesn't happen at
Or
all.
at least happens later. Yeah.
Happens
So
later,
you
yeah.
have the Serbian nationalist shoots for Archduke Ferdinand, and then on July 28th, 1914, Austria-Hungary declares what's expected to be a short war
Yeah.
against Serbia. But the problem is that there's this alliance system, so it kind of pulls one nation in after another into the conflict, right?
And
So on
that's really
August
why both
1st,
sides were talking so big, right? Like
yeah,
one reason why they were like, because they both knew they had Germany on one side. Well, Austria-Hungary knew they had Germany on one side, right? And Serbia knew they had Russia on their side. So it's
yeah,
pulling these what should have become a Balkan conflict, right, becomes a
yeah.
world war because of these alliances.
Yeah,
That's something
because
important to
Germany
understand.
basically says Germany's like, we're going to back Serbia. And
Yeah,
then Germany's like, oh, yeah, well, we're backing Austria Hungary. So then they declare war on Russia,
yeah.
um,
So Germany declares war on
because Russia
Russia.
says they're going to back Serbia, right?
Yeah,
So,
and
um,
Russia mobilizes their army first. That's what
yeah,
spooks Germany. No one really thought they didn't really think it was going to be anything. From what I was able to, over the years find out about it, they still didn't think this was going to lead to something big. But
yeah,
because honestly, they had these big armies and they wanted to use them. So that's
yeah,
something else to really remember. Yeah. So Russia is the first to mobilize their soldiers. Germany declares war on Russia, and then 2 days later, Germany also declares war on France.
yeah. And after they invade Belgium, which had an own pact with Britain, Britain declares war on Germany and Austria Hungary, and boom, the Great War
When they
begins.
invade Belgium, yeah.
Yep.
And it's
And just so
important to
we're on the
mention
same,
Belgium. We got to talk about Belgium a little bit too.
right? And I think we will because a lot of the fighting takes place there. And we need to kind of understand that. I mean, the main two fronts is the Western Front and you have the Eastern Front. The Western Front is part of German strategy, which was the Schlieffen Plan. Did I pronounce that right? I think I did. I don't know.
Schleifen, yeah.
Schlieffen, yeah.
It's basically
Um,
go through Belgium, right? Knock France out of the
exactly.
war quickly, go
Yep.
through Belgium, and then focus all their attention on Russia. That's where their real war they're expecting it
Yep.
to be.
But they get bogged down. So they get through Belgium. So Germany, as opposed to attacking France directly, as you're saying, Tom, they attack through Belgium. They get into France and they kind of get bogged down. Meanwhile, on the other side, they also get bogged down in the east on the Russian front. So now they're fighting a two front war. And because they get kind of bogged down, more or less, they're they kind of ultimately the Allies retreat right on the western side to the Marne River in France, and that's when they were able to finally stop the German advance by the Marne River in France in September of 1914. And after that, they can't really outflank one another.
No.
So what they do is they just dig in for a long siege. I mean, this is what we know as trench warfare. They
The trench
basically
warfare, yeah.
build these trenches, and that's where the war ends. It's about fighting an inch here, a mile here, few yards
Yeah.
here. I mean, it literally is just like a stalemate for the next four
Well, what
years in
happens?
the
Yeah,
West.
and the Germans realized that pretty early on, and they fortified their trenches pretty well. If you
Yeah,
see pictures of a German trench versus an Allied trench during this war, the Germans are fighting in a defensive position, so they put in better flooring, right? They drain the trench. Some of them even have electricity and stuff like that, like
yeah,
lights and everything in it. The Allied trenches, because they're always trying to just attack the Germans and break through, are
yeah,
just like they never say, "Oh, we're not going to be here that long." So these are the ones when you hear like the horrible trench warfare, like the trench foot, those
yeah,
trench rats, right, being up to your knees in water and God knows what else. Okay, things like that. That's more the Allied, what you're seeing from the British and the Belgians and the French.
yeah. So this is happening. It's 1914. The war is pretty much kind of already broken into these two camps. Things are going well. Let's get to the United States.
Yes, there
Um,
you go.
yeah, most Americans believe that there's absolutely no reason to join a struggle that's like 3,000 miles away. Like to them, I mean, obviously the public opinion's strong and it is divided due to the fact that we have so many immigrants in this country that are German, they're Austrian, they're, you name it, right? I mean, they're French. So it is divided, but for the most part, Americans are very adamant about the fact, as is our president, Woodrow Wilson, that the United States is going to remain
Neutral.
neutral,
Yeah, and
right?
but we tended to be a little more pro-British, I would say.
100%.
And the
100%.
main reason for that, and I always like to stress this, was the British do something very, very smart when this war breaks out, and they cut. Right, they control the navy. Right, they control the
Hmm.
seas for the most part. So they go and they cut all the transatlantic cables, those giant cables that are laying down. Now, this is before internet and all this other stuff, obviously. And they cut all these cables from Europe to the United States,
I think that's a
except
great podcast. People need to understand this. Like the
yeah,
way we communicated with Europe was through England, and it was
yeah,
through an actual cable that was
cable that
laid
was
at the
laid on the
bottom
bottom of
of
the
the Atlantic
yeah,
Ocean,
yeah,
like through
and
ships, a
and the
telephone
British
wire.
yeah, and the British cut all of them except the ones coming from England. So now
Yep,
all the information that we're pretty much getting from World War I about World War I is coming from the English, the
absolutely.
British, and they know what they're doing. It's going to be skewed, right? It's going to have that spin on it, and they're doing that. And the big thing about it is that invasion of Belgium. They know what they're doing, so they're saying that all these pictures are coming out, and all these stories, excuse me, are coming out saying how the the Belgian women are getting raped, right? That the Germans are
Hmm.
killing them all. You know how the Germans had those spike helmets in World War I, which is not there as a weapon. Okay, it's supposed to symbolize all of the Prussian kingdoms coming under one ruler, but they're saying that they're like ripping babies from their mother's hands and sticking them on these spikes and stuff like that, right? That they're
Yep.
crucifying soldiers in no man's land. None of this stuff was actually happening. Okay, now I'm sure there were rapes and murders and stuff like that,
Yeah,
obviously,
that's
but
usually the case.
not on these
Unfortunately.
massive levels because the Germans are just trying to get through Belgium as quickly as possible. The fact that it took them 3-4 days to get through Belgium is what allows France to be saved. Is the fact that the Belgians actually fight back. Right?
Yep.
They didn't even expect it to happen. Anyway, I'm not going to get too much into that.
You know,
But
an American magazine at this time, because it is British propaganda, actually, um, says literally calls Germany the bully of Europe,
yeah, you have that
and
picture of it, like the King Kong looking like guy, right, with
yeah,
the
yeah,
helmet on,
yeah,
right, the brute, right, and
yep,
she's like holding like the baby and stuff like that. And
the
so people are
Huns.
hearing about this, the Huns, the Huns, the Huns. So they're seeing it, they're hearing about this, and all the information is coming from the British. So obviously, there's going to be a bit of this like pro-British side, like, oh my God, these Germans are crazy. Now, these are not the Nazis of World War II. So that's
Nope.
something
Oh
very
yeah, let's get
important
that
to
out of the way.
understand. See, so
These are not.
there's no such thing as Nazism at this point.
Doesn't
A
exist yet.
lot of
Nope.
times, students always get confused with that, like, "Oh, the Nazis." No, these are not Nazis. Hitler's there. A lot of a lot of soon-to-be Nazis are in the
Yeah,
army at this time.
Hitler's in the army.
He's there.
Hitler's
Oh,
basically in the army right now.
he's there. You can see those pictures, of
Yep.
him. He's excited for this too. He's
Yep.
pumped. Um,
But he's just a mere private or whatever. I'm
but
not sure
he's
his
yeah.
rank, but he's not
Well,
really
we
any.
can get to we can get to a story about him at the end before we shut
Yeah,
him
and I
off.
think it'll be cool one. Yeah, we'll get
Yeah,
to that one at the end because I know exactly what you're trying to talk
yeah,
about.
yeah. It's
And
improvement. Yeah,
we should also say that Americans kind of felt close to Britain also because of the common ancestry and language. I
yeah.
mean, obviously similar democratic institution,
Anglo,
legal
yeah,
systems. Yeah. So let's
Anglo-Saxon.
kind of talk about it. The biggest tie that we have that ties us to Britain rather is economic. I mean, America's economic ties with allies were far stronger than the ties with Central Powers.
Yeah,
Just an idea, like before the war, American trade with Britain and France was more than double its trade with Germany, right? But by 1915, because we already had this set up, this idea that we actually traded so much more with Allied powers, with Britain and France before the war even happened, and now there was just a bigger demand for things. So the Allies just flooded American manufacturers with orders, right, for any form of war supply. So even though as a nation we are neutral, that doesn't mean that our companies cannot continue doing what they did prior to the war, which is sell to allied nations. So in this case, we would sell dynamite, cannon powder, submarines, copper wire, tubing, armored cars, you name it. The United States shipped millions of dollars of war supplies to the Allies, and their requests just kept on coming. As a matter of fact, by 1915, American factories were producing so many supplies for the Allies that the United States was experiencing an actual labor shortage. I mean, this is insane. From like
yeah.
by the end of the
There,
war, the trade with the Allied nations, so Britain and France, right, quadrupled, while the trade with Germany fell to zero. We basically stopped trading with Germany because of this propaganda machine, which is insane,
yeah, we had
right?
a financial interest to make sure the Allies won.
Yep. Yeah, that's what I'm
And
saying, and that's why a lot of people say that's why we went into war because of this, the fact that like at
well,
this
because
point,
because there was no guarantee the Allies were going to win either. Like they
exactly, and
were,
we need to get repaid. We need to get
especially
repaid.
exactly because if Germany wins, we're not going to get our money.
Yep.
So we got to make sure that the side that we want to win wins. And we can get into that more in a little bit. But that's
Yep.
really what's going on here. It's just this propaganda, this spinning. But still, as much as it is, they still don't want to actually enter the war. The American people are
Yep.
very, very much against it. And that's actually not one like Wilson's campaign in the next election is that he kept us out of the war.
Yep. Yep.
But something big happens before then. Obviously, we have to
Yeah,
get to
so let's kind of get into the events that bring us
1915.
in. First things first, what we're looking at here is the British blockade all German ports, right? So they basically are trying to starve Germany because
Yeah,
the United States, while we're not really sending Germany arms, we're still sending them food, as are other nations. So England is like, we're going to starve them, and they actually kind of do.
Well,
By
the
this
idea of
big,
this is the idea of total war,
yeah,
right? You're not
right,
just fighting the army, you're also fighting the civilian population. During this war, too, they start bombing, both sides start bombing cities. It doesn't
yep,
happen as much as you see in World War II, but with the Zeppelin bombs and then obviously with airplanes, they're bombing cities, which they're actually targeting civilians. The idea is let's target the civilians, have them starving, right? Have them being killed. The soldiers will desert and be like, I have to go protect my family. I'm not going to fight in the front anymore. And therefore, that can help us win the war. That was the plan because it was this war was so brutal. And it's
yep,
not the first time in history this happened, but in modern warfare, when you're targeting civilians, you're not supposed to do that.
yep.
Ideally, right? The
And
gentleman
but
warfare
this
does
is yeah,
happen.
right. But this is what kind of leads for us to get into this war, and the reason for it is because Germany retaliates through German U-boats.
Yeah.
Basically, the way they look at it is like, all right, we're going to retaliate by sinking any British or Allied ships that is anywhere near the waters around Britain. They're just going to sink it,
And they're
and it's
successful
told,
doing this.
yeah, very successful doing this. I mean, it's a new technology. Not, I'm not saying this is the first submarine because we have evidence of submarines being around in the Civil War, but American Civil War, that is. But this is the first successful submarine warfare. U-boats sank so many ships, and this is kind of where it becomes interesting because for America, at least, May 7th, 1915, a German U-boat sinks the British liner Lusitania off the Irish coast. Right, of the 1,100 and some persons that were there, 128 were Americans. And this was viewed by a lot of American newspapers as an act of war, that the Germans just killed Americans that were on this Lusitania. First of all,
That's for
Lusitania was
sure.
not really innocent because
No.
although it was a luxury liner, the entire bottom level of it was full of arms and weapons being
That's one
shipped
reason
over.
why it sunk so quickly.
Yep,
And this isn't disputed anymore. I think years ago, probably when we were in school, it was disputed. But then they go down and find the Lusitania a couple years ago.
yep,
I remember reading about that, and they actually found that no, there was armaments in there, and they
yep,
found the papers. And to be, I guess, giving all the information, the German embassy actually took out a ad in the New York Times
yep,
prior to this and saying, listen, if you are traveling to England, beware that this is a war zone. There is a war going on, and if you are traveling to England across the Atlantic, your ship might be sunk. So just be aware. And
yep,
so they took this out in the New York Times, telling Americans, listen, this could happen to you. So just be on alert. And
yep.
that's what
Absolutely.
happened.
Great book by Eric Larson on this, by the way, called Dead Wake. He's obviously a historian, but he writes in a very modern new history. So it's kind of an easy, fun read called Dead Wake, and it's about Lusitania and all the stuff that we kind of just mentioned. And then, so we kind of start pressuring Germany. First of all, this is the common misconception, especially when teaching
Yeah.
this, because for
It does
some
not
reason,
bring us into the war. It does not bring
yeah,
us into the war.
by any means, like this happens in 1915. The United
Yeah.
States doesn't declare war until 1917. But
What I would,
this is
what, yeah, what I would
go ahead.
say is that it
Yeah, go ahead.
definitely changes the morale. Now you're not
Yes.
going to have people kind of like, oh, maybe we like the Germans, maybe we're on the side of the British. No, now it's more, the 100% is support of the British for the most part. You're not going to have people at least outwardly saying we should get involved in the war on the Central Power side. That's done. You're not going to
Yep.
see that anymore. This is going to turn public opinion solely against the Germans, but it's not, again, to the point of let's declare war. Let's send troops to England, to France, to Europe. We're not there yet. We're still not there.
Nope.
And that's, again, what a lot of misconception is, that Lusitania, we go to war. It's not like that. It's not like Pearl Harbor. It's
Yep.
That's not what it is.
No, it takes almost 2 years before it happens. But
But
what
in
does
another big
happen?
event, yeah.
Yeah. So what happens within those 2 years is by January of 19. First of all, so some more ships are sank, and we go back and forth with Germany.
And
There's
Germany signs the Sussex Pledge.
Yeah, I was
That's
going to
what
say
you mentioned
Sussex
that.
Pledge, and it's like we're going to stop, but then they're like they choose not to stop. Sinking our ships. So needless to say, what does happen here is there's another German provocation, and that happens on January 31st, 1917,
Yeah,
and
this one
that's
angers everybody. Yeah,
this one angers everybody, right? Because this is where Germany basically flat out says that they're going to have completely unrestricted warfare. Um, and they're going to basically stop and sink any ship near England, whether it's hostile or neutral. And Wilson is like freaked out. Like this basically means that the United States might actually go into
well,
war
I think we have to
because
talk about context, like what happened. Like we have to explain briefly, I guess, what happened in Europe at this point which is changing the German idea, because the German does they do go with the Sussex Pledge for about a year and a half, right?
Yeah, which means
2
they
years.
promise they're going to stop sinking ships. That's
They're going
basically
to
what they
stop
did.
sinking
Yep,
the ships,
that's what their pledge is.
or basically they said they're going to surface. They're going to evacuate everyone off the ship and then sink it, which makes no sense, right? But
Well, I guess they're not loss of lives, but we'll destroy all the armaments that are going to
armaments, but
England. I
we're
mean,
not going to kill the people.
yeah,
That's basically
yeah,
one of the things they're saying.
and
But what
they
happens?
do that. They do that
They do
for,
that.
like
They
you
do
said.
that. It's worth it to them because they're keeping the United States out of the war. Because remember, they're not
Yep.
really losing World War I at this point. They're
Mm.
actually almost winning it, because what happens in 1917 is also Russia leaves the war.
Yes.
So that's very big to understand. The Lenin takes over, the whole Bolsheviks and everything like that, which is a whole other thing.
Podcast.
But
Yeah.
yeah, podcast. And Russia leaves the war. So
Yeah.
Germany
So
now can
Germany's free to focus on fighting in the West,
focus on
basically.
the West, and like now we have to go unrestricted submarine warfare again and just beat the British. All
Yep.
right, Bismarck is like, forget this. Okay, I'm not dealing with Russia anymore on my Eastern Front. I can focus everything on the Western Front. And he's doing a gamble. He knows this is probably going to bring the U.S. into the war, and he's okay with that because he's thinking he can beat the British before the U.S. can ever send troops over.
Yep.
So it's a gamble. And then what he does is obviously he tries to make an alliance, or it puts a process in place to try to get Mexico.
Yep. The
Right.
Zimmerman
So go
note,
ahead.
and this is what actually.
This is what pushes it. Yeah.
Yep. The Zimmerman note is a secret telegram from German Foreign Minister Zimmerman to the German ambassador in Mexico, and it was intercepted and decoded by the British agents. Go figure, right?
And
Who let us know.
they run it right to Wilson right away.
Yeah,
They're
right
excited.
to the United States. And the telegram promised an alliance between Mexico and Germany, and promised that if the war with the United States ever broke out, Germany would support Mexico in recovering its lost territory in Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona from the Mexican American War, which is what we covered.
A couple weeks ago, right?
Well, I guess it's more than a couple of weeks ago. But yeah, a few episodes ago.
Yeah.
So the Germans hoped that the American war with Mexico would actually keep the United States out of the war in Europe. So the
It
Germans are
wasn't a
kind of
bad idea.
yeah, the Germans are kind of trying to instigate Mexico, like, hey, why don't you like start messing with the United
Yeah.
States? The idea is that Mexico will be fighting the United States, and therefore the United States will be too busy to try to go and help
They send
Britain.
troops over in Europe. It's
Yeah.
not going to happen.
Go ahead.
Mexico, it never gets delivered to Mexico.
Yep.
I've done research on this past because I got kind of curious with it, and they said even if it got there, the chances that the Mexican government would have gone along with this are virtually zero. They didn't have an army strong enough to even contend with the United States. There would have been no way for them to actually do this. So if they probably would have rejected the offer.
Yep.
Because it just wouldn't have made any sense to didn't try to invade the United States. And the United States would then there was a fear still then that the United States would just come and take over more of Mexico then. So
Yep.
it was just probably wasn't going to amount to anything. But the Germans were willing to take that gamble. But when this comes out, this just how dare you try to have our neighbor to the south invade us? Like, how dare you do that? So this is what angers the American government. Wilson goes to Congress, says his speech, and then the United States will now declare war on Germany in
Yep. April
1917.
2nd. Yeah, April 2nd, 1917, Woodrow Wilson goes before joint session of Congress.
And now
Yeah.
they're
So
recruiting soldiers, conscription, right? Eventually, you have about 2.8 million Americans through the selective service to be drafted to fight in World War
yeah,
II.
so let's kind of get into this, like mobilizing and kind of what the United States does there. Raising an army, as you said, Selective Service Act is created. Today we all know it. I mean, when you and I turn 18, they sent us our Selective Service draft cards,
Yes.
basically.
We can still look up our numbers.
Yeah, probably still there, right?
No, they're still there. Yeah.
I mean, I have my card somewhere, actually. I made sure I didn't lose it, which means I put it in a safe spot, which means I have no idea.
You don't even need it. You don't even need it.
No, everything's
Just
more digital
Just
now.
need your social security number.
Yep. But essentially, it's an act that requires all men to register with the government. So it's like there's no hiding from the government. You're going to register with the government, and then you will be randomly selected for military service. And by 1918, 24 million men had registered for the act. Of this number, about 3 million were called up, and about 2 million troops, American troops, actually reached Europe before truce was signed. And like we mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, we got there kind of late. So in the grand scheme of things, just the fact that we got 2 million across, that's not that bad, right? So the 8-month training period takes place partially in the United States and partially in Europe. There's a huge diversity in military as well, because the government is really trying to fight these central powers in any way possible. So there's these publications that are appealing to all Americans, regardless of race or ethnicity. to support this war effort. Like one pamphlet reminded Americans that black man, yellow man, and white man from all quarters of the globe are fighting side by side to free the world from Hun peril. I mean, that's literally what the pamphlet was
That's
saying.
crazy for 1917.
Yeah. Also, one thing a lot of people, you guys probably see this all the time, but just maybe you don't know that it came from here. But the famous "I want you" for the U.S. Army Uncle Sam
Uncle Sam, yeah.
recruiting poster, the finger, like "I want you" for the U.S. Army, that comes out of World War One. It is the idea was to kind of create a poster that appealed to a sense of patriotism, and obviously, this "I want you" for the U.S. Army has appeared in multiple wars since then, but it was created during this time due to the fact that we're trying to get so many Americans to get registered and be sent over there. About 400,000 African Americans would ultimately serve in the armed forces. They served in segregated units. They were excluded from the Navy and the Marines, however, so mostly just Army. The most famous of these, which I think deserves a podcast of its own, is the 369th Infantry Regiment, also
Hmm.
known as the Harlem Hellfighters.
Yeah.
They served a record 191 days in the trenches.
And they were given
And
some of the hardest, highest
assignments.
casualty missions. Yeah, they were kind
Yeah.
of like the first ones in and stuff like that. And it was because basically racism. I mean,
Yeah.
they didn't really
The,
care as much of what happened to them, and so
yeah.
it was horrible.
But yeah, the France
They
gave
didn't
them like
force
the
them.
highest military honors. I mean,
Yeah, they were actually very welcoming to them. Yeah, because
yeah.
yeah, I understand too. Like when the Americans come over, a lot of the mindset was us going over to help the French, and it was kind of our payback. We're going to help you. You helped us in the revolution. Now we're here to help you too, right? And there's that saying, like, like the person that was in charge of the American soldiers, Pershing, supposedly. Again, this is kind of debated, but it makes for a good story, right? That's what history is.
Yeah.
On his way, as the soldiers are going to the front, he stops by the grave of the Marquis de Lafayette, right? I'm
Yeah.
sure you heard this. And
Yep.
he
Yep.
says, Lafayette, my name is Pershing. I'm here with the Americans. So supposedly he says, we are here to return the favor.
Yep.
So that's really how a lot of Americans saw this, right? The French helped us in the revolution. Now we're helping them basically save their country from the Germans here.
When the American Expeditionary Force, AEF, which is what we were referred to as, that's what the American Army was referred to, that was led by John Pershing, arrived in France. France actually wanted us to basically fill in, or rather fill out, like empty numbers in their battalions and
Their
corps, and we were
battalions, yeah.
like, no, that's not going to
No,
happen.
yeah.
Like we're going to fight as the United
United
States
States
Army.
Army.
Like we're not going to be here to just basically fill up your ranks because your
Yeah.
soldiers died. And
Remember, the
that
United States Army was not what it is today, what it is later
no, we
on.
were
Like
not a world power at this
there was
time.
no,
Nope.
and we had no interest in it. Well, we
Yeah.
did, and that's not true. Like especially with
Yeah.
imperialism, but we had like a
We
very
were new
small.
to it. Yeah, I would say we were new to imperialism,
Yeah,
considering the Spanish American War. Like as an empire building nation, we've only been that for maybe 20 years, while the European nations have been it for hundreds. You know what I mean? Like that's
yeah.
the difference.
We didn't have this war like culture,
Hmm.
glorifying it as the
Yep.
Europeans did. Yeah, this
Yep.
long history that they did.
So before before I guess we get into like what type of war it was and what Americans did here. First of all, did you ever read Max Brooks' Harlem Hellfighters?
Parts of it. Max Brooks is a
So
great author. Yeah,
yeah, so he wrote World War Z. So
yeah.
for you guys listening out
A
there,
few others ones
Harlem
too. Yeah.
Hellfighters is actually a graphic novel.
Yeah.
It is awesome about the Harlem Hellfighters. So just I forgot to plug that before because it's a good book. But as we mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, this is a much different war. I mean, machine guns, right? 600 rounds per minute. Actually, did you see this? I don't know if you saw this statistic. Machine guns are responsible for 90% of all Allied
That.
casualties at the
Yeah,
Battle of the Somme in 1916,
which is crazy.
which is insane. And then airplanes are huge during this time. And airplanes are kind of cool because they're basically made out of wood. I mean, they're so not what we consider airplanes today, and they're so new. I
Remember,
mean, they're
airplanes were only like 12 years old at this
yeah, they're
point.
so new.
Like think about
Um,
that, and they go, "Let's put bombs on it."
no,
But
yeah, and they
yeah,
started with bringing bricks up there and started throwing bricks down
right.
because
So
it was
they would drop hooks in the trenches and just drag
yeah,
the hook and rip people apart. I mean,
yep,
anything they could do. Really, the airplanes. I know we talked about like the Red Baron, the dogfights, and they were
yep,
spectacular to watch. But they also probably didn't have that much impact on the war itself.
nope, yep,
Mostly airplanes were used for reconnaissance, seeing where the
reconnaissance. Yep.
trenches were, and the pilots would fight and shoot at each
Well, that's
other.
what it was. The pilots, that's what dogfights. So they started
Yeah,
bringing like pistols with them at first. They're
yeah,
like, wait, why is this other guy shooting at me? Then they brought machine guns, and then they finally, halfway through the war, they mounted machine guns, and they created this interrupter gear, which kind of permitted the stream of bullets to
yeah.
avoid
So you could shoot
the
at the
blades.
propeller. Yeah,
Yeah.
And then
Um,
and then one of those planes crashed. The other side found that they did the same thing, and they just kind of just one up each other
Crazy.
with it. But yeah, basically you have trench warfare, right? And one
Yep.
thing that also makes this complicated is something that the United States has in abundance, and something we ship over a lot, which is barbed wire. I don't think we
Yep.
can really talk about World War One without the importance of barbed wire, because barbed wire is super easy to make, it's super cheap, but it is super effective too. You just wrap some barbed wire around something that makes it totally impassable.
Yep.
And then
Unless you have a tank, which was a whole
well,
new
that's
thing.
what comes around. But you try to have barbed wire and you try to run across that when another guy's shooting machine guns at you. Yeah, good
Yeah.
luck.
Yeah. Probably not.
And
Probably not.
that's why you having more people died at the Battle of the Somme, more British soldiers died at the Battle of the Somme than the U.S. losing the entire war. That's
Yeah.
crazy.
It's
You think
crazy.
about that.
So the Americans kind of get there right in time. So the U.S. Troops play a major role in throwing back German attacks at Chateau Thierry and Biellewood, but also primarily the biggest thing that we take place that kind of we not that we take place in, but that we partake in is Germany's last ditch desperate offensive, right? Which is the Second Battle of the Marne, which
Yeah,
happens in July of 1918. 18, yep. The Germans suffer like 150,000 casualties, retreat by August 3rd, but the United States, the Allies overall, the counterattack in September with the United States kind of defeating the German troops. Mikhail, near French-German border. This is
yeah.
where
Well,
we really kind of
yeah,
make our name for ourselves. The
there's
Argonne
some,
Forest
and I think
offensive.
it's important to stress too. And I guess this is going to sound. I always when I teach this, it sounds very like pro USA, and it is, I guess.
I
And
was
I'm
going to
not going
say,
to. Well, it is, but it's also like it's also what's happened. And they talk about this is that the Americans fought very differently than the British and the French and the than the European way of fighting. The European way of fighting back then was very much like a game of chess, right? If you outflanked your opponent, if you did X, Y, and Z, there was the gentlemanly thing, right, to surrender, right? Because you're
Mhm.
not going to have your entire force be wiped out. You're not going to cause unnecessary loss of life on both sides, right? And the
Yep.
Americans come in and they're like, no, we're not going to do that. So now what happens a lot of times in the Argonne Forest, there's a great movie about this. Books, movies, documentaries about the Lost Battalion. I'm sure you heard of it, right?
That's
Um,
actually a pretty good movie.
it's a
It's
pretty
an
good
A
movie.
and E movie,
Yeah, but
TV
so
movie,
it
but
was
great.
books and stuff before then.
Yeah.
And it's basically this battalion that gets surrounded, right? And they get cut off from their own line. And the Germans know they're there and they keep on trying to get this group to surrender, and they're just like, no, we'll negotiate your surrender, but we're not surrendering. And they capture some of the soldiers, like, why are you not surrendering? They're like, because we're not. Like, if you want to beat us, you're going
Yeah.
to have to beat us. And the Germans just can't fathom this. They just, why are you beaten? Why are you not surrendering? So basically, they describe it in the book as it was basically a thorn in the German side that just got infected. And the Germans were pouring so much manpower to go after the Americans at this one spot in the Argonne Forest because the Americans just kept on fighting it off, fighting it off. They couldn't have survived forever. It's like going to be like another Alamo type of deal, right? They're
Yeah.
just going to eventually run out of ammunition or run out of whatever. But because they just keep on going after them, they're preoccupied with that. They can't. They're pulling forces away from other parts of the line, particularly where the French and the British were. They're able to break through in those parts, and once the German line breaks, that's it. That's going to be
Yeah.
the beginning of the end.
Yeah. The collapse of Germany, by the way, comes shortly thereafter all this.
Yeah, yeah.
And because
It's part of
the
that.
story you just mentioned happens in the Argonne Forest, which is
Yeah,
one of the last pushes, military pushes of this conflict. But by late 1918, the war is basically crippling the German economy. Civilians are lacking food and supplies. There's food riots and strikes that erupt in Germany as well as Austria-Hungary. Um,
and Britain too. Britain's not
yeah.
they. Britain,
Oh, this
France,
is like a just everyone's
they're all
done.
bankrupt. If
Yeah.
you're fighting this war, with the exception of some of the smaller countries, obviously the United States, you're bankrupt. Like
Yeah.
this war wiped you out. Forget about
So
the human toll. Yeah,
right. So November 3rd, 1918, Austria-Hungary surrenders to the Allies, and basically that same day, German sailors actually mutiny against government authority.
yeah,
Um, More or less by November 9th, it is very obvious that actually socialist leaders in the capital of Berlin establish a German republic, which is what Hitler
yeah.
eventually points to. The Kaiser gives up the throne.
He flees. But what's important is they're not surrendering. I think that's also something that history kind of gets confused on. It's not a surrender. When World War One, when the guns go silent, it's well, you know the time, right? It's
Yeah.
11, and it's supposed to, and that's again goes back to this whole
Yeah, 11th hour on
crazy,
the 11th day of
yeah.
the 11th month of 1918,
His
Germany
idea is
agreed
it's a
to ceasefire.
Yeah, because it's supposed to be the last war ever. So they
Yeah.
wanted to have like a special time, really just so that school children could say 100 years later, when did the last war end? And the school children would be like, oh, the last war ever ended on the 11th hour, the 11th day of the 11th month in 1918, which is not true. There's going to be
Yeah.
another war. But this armistice could have, the thing that drives me nuts is this armistice could have ended the war or brought the fighting to a stop days before, definitely hours before, but they waited. They waited when I say they, the powers that be, right? Because
Yeah.
they wanted that catchphrase. They wanted that 11,
And they
11,
still
11.
send out
So,
troops.
so
Like people still
at,
died.
at 10:58, 10:59, they're
Yep.
still sending out troops. And they knew the generals, they knew, no, 11 o'clock it's going to be over. And they just said, keep on sending troops out because they wanted those bargaining chips for the actual treaty.
Which is insane. It's
So
insane.
literally people dying at 10:59, oh, 11 o'clock, all right, stop firing. Like, wait, what? Yeah, war's
So
over.
so
Like,
just so we could kind of sum this up with the war itself, and I think we'll also talk a little bit about what's happening in the United States at
yeah,
home
this
during this
time.
time.
Yeah.
But
Mhm.
World War One was the bloodiest war in history up to that point.
Yeah.
Nothing compares to it. Death numbered about 22 million. That's more than half of them. More than half of these people were civilians. In addition, 20 million people were wounded. 10 million more became refugees. The direct economic cost of the war may have been about $338 billion.
Yeah. It's
Um,
300 billion just in the United States.
yeah, for the United States. Yep. And the United States lost 48,000 men in battle, another 62,000 dying of disease, and more than 200,000 Americans were wounded.
And Russia
Crazy.
loses 3/4 of its army.
I
And their
know.
army was over 12 million.
I know.
And that is nothing compared to what happened in World War II.
Yep.
This
Which is
entire war is nothing. Well, I don't want to say nothing, but if you
in
compare it to
comparison. Yeah.
if you,
We look at
in
numbers.
comparison to World
Yeah.
War II, is just, and that's just like crazy. Then when you think about how this war, how they said this is total destruction, sickens us to war. Mankind will never have another war. Yeah,
Yeah.
really. Okay, 20 years later, there's a war that dwarfs this in every possible way.
And before we kind of move on to the home front stuff idea, doughboy is what the
Yes.
American soldiers were called at the time. And I always try to find out from my students, and we always find the same things because no one really knows why their American soldiers are called
Oh,
doughboys.
because if you poke them in their stomach, they would go just like that little guy on TV. Isn't that what it was?
Yeah, totally.
Isn't that what it was?
Well, according to one explanation, okay, I mean yours is better, obviously. The term dates back to the Mexican American War because they said the American infantrymen made such long treks over dusty terrain. So they said it actually gave them this appearance of being covered in flour or dough. That's
That was also
one.
something to do with their uniforms was another
Yeah, then there
thing,
was another
right?
thing that they used this dough to like clean off their belts or something. It was like clay or dough that they used. I don't know. There again, there's then someone says something to do with their buttons and on the color of their
Another thing
uniforms.
had to do with the idea is that they were such like fresh soldiers. They were like dough coming out of the oven, like not cooked yet, not ready for battle. I heard that whole thing that the
Right.
doughboys, they're
But
not
needless to
ready.
say, the American soldiers were known as doughboys, just like the British soldiers were known as Tommies, which is an abbreviation of Tommy Atkins, which is like a generic name. Like in the United States, we would be John Doe. In England, it would be Tommy Atkins, so they were known as Tommies. But Americans were known as doughboys. So um, again, another great book. I'm sorry, guys, but another great book is actually The Last of the Doughboys, and it's by Richard Rubin. He wrote this in like 2005. So kind of a crazy story, Tom. In 2003, right? So this is 85 years after the World War One ended. This author is like, you know what? I'm going to try to find any alive, still living
Surviving.
American veteran of World War One, and he sets out and finds like a dozen of them, like age like a 113,
Wow.
and he interviews all of the last surviving, hence the last of the doughboys, last surviving doughboys. I mean, it's an amazing story that these people are alive like post 9/11, like, and they fought in World War One. Crazy story. But two very known American doughboys and American soldiers from this war. One wasn't really a doughboy, Eddie Rickenbauer, right? He
Yeah,
was
he's
a famous fighter
pilot.
pilot.
He's our
um,
version of the Red Baron.
yes, absolutely. He actually fought against the Red Baron, but so he engaged in 134 air battles, downed 26 enemy aircraft, and became like the number one American ace of aces, they said. But interestingly enough, he first of all he was a race car driver back before the war in the United States. Then he goes to France as a driver and to like the aviation division. And as a driver in your airfields, he starts like asking people to teach him how to fly. So he learns how to fly on his own. And by the time he joins the U.S. Army Air Service, he basically becomes like an old time best ace American pilot. You know, this guy didn't even know how to
Yeah.
fly until months prior. And the other story, which I think is also could be a podcast in its own, would be Alvin York, which is a crazy story of Sergeant
Sergeant
York.
York. Yeah.
Um, this is a guy that, first of all, was a conscientious objector, refused to go to war because he said the Bible said thou shalt not kill. Then he goes to war. Um, and then on October 8th, 1918, he's armed with only a rifle and a revolver. He winds up killing 25 Germans and then captures single handedly, as weird and crazy as that sounds, 132 German prisoners um, by himself. Again, you guys should read his story because it's insane. They said it was like now disputed that perhaps there was 6 other doughboys that helped him do the capture. But again, the story itself is awesome. I mean, it's just crazy stuff. So I
Yeah.
think we're going to finish up real quick with how does the war change the United States back home, right, for Americans?
Well, a
So,
couple of things. Like when the war is mobilizing, it changes a lot of anything German's kind of like outlawed, believe it or not,
mhm,
right? They like, what, sauerkraut. You can't call it sauerkraut. It's Liberty cabbage, right? It's Liberty dogs, things of that nature. German was a very popular language. It was no longer allowed to be taught in schools. But I think one of the biggest things is you had the National War Labor Board, right?
mhm,
And basically, in exchange for war, for wage increases in an 8-hour workday, and the right to unionize for unions and collectively bargain, the labor leaders agreed not to disrupt war production with a strike.
yeah,
And so that's one reason why it's kind of like going on. And but then when the war ends, now that's why in the 1920s you start seeing more like labor strikes and stuff like that.
yeah,
But they're saying, all right, we purposely did not strike. You gave us some stuff during the war years. We purposely didn't strike to help win the war. Now we want what was promised to us,
yeah.
and that's going to usher that in.
So, yeah, like you said, the War Industries Board, there, like to get a little bit more specific with it, basically Congress gives President Wilson direct control over the economy, which is so unprecedented, but also so against the idea of like laissez-faire capitalism. He basically nationalizes industries, right? Urges industries to eliminate any waste by standardizing production, basically setting production quotas and allocating raw materials to companies. This War Industries Board, which is a government agency, basically tells businesses how to run their business. It is so un-American at the time. But as you said, people were like, "Hey, listen, it's war. We're going to do the right thing, and we're going to kind of stay back." And it does. The War Industry Board does up our production by 20% during the war, so it definitely works. But for example, it tells like typewriter ribbons. It tells a company make only 5 colors instead of 150 colors. Like they would get very specific as to telling companies what they could or could not do. But going back to this union membership, absolutely, it climbed from 2.5 million in 1916, right before the United States entered the war, to more than 4 million by 1919 when we left the war. And then strikes, as you said, just kind of break up afterwards because people are like, all right, enough is enough. Another thing is food administration. There is the
Yep.
fuel administration and food administration.
Well, daylight savings comes out because of this.
Because of this,
Yeah.
absolutely, it's
So
designed
that's
during
important
this
to
time.
remember.
So for those of you guys that don't like daylight savings time, it is here
Yeah.
because of World War One. It
World
was a
One. Yep.
World War One measure um, to kind of take advantage of longer days of the summer and save on fuel consumption.
Yep.
Um, they had gasless Sundays, lightless nights to conserve fuel. Then you had food administration under Herbert Hoover, where you have this idea that one day a week was meatless Monday, and then there was a sweetless day, and there was wheatless days,
And
and
ration cards and everything like that.
that's
So
all it
something
was
that
about.
like generations later just couldn't even understand.
Yeah,
Like that's what
remember
happens when
that?
the country actually goes to war. There's going to be things that you're not going to be able to get.
Yeah.
That's what actually would happen.
I'm gonna try that with my kids tomorrow. They're gonna be like, "Dad, can I have some like candy?" And I'd be like, "Nope, today is a sweetless day."
Yeah. Good luck.
Yeah, I'll let you know how it goes for me. Um, and when it comes to selling the war, obviously, the United States spends about 35.5 billion on the war effort, right? And a lot of that stuff comes from taxes, but also Liberty loans and Victory loans and bonds, selling and
Bonds. Yeah.
buying
Victory bonds.
bonds. And this become well, it's funny because it's almost like the United States government creates a blueprint during World War One on how to run World War Two at home,
So, oh yeah. Yeah. Without a doubt.
right?
Without a doubt.
Not to mention the propaganda aspect. I mean, they created a committee on public information, which was basically like, all right, we're going to get
They made movies,
artists,
yeah. It was
yeah,
anything they
make
can do
movies,
to.
posters, cartoons,
You
anything
want
to
to
just
yeah.
sell.
You want to dehumanize the enemy.
Yep,
That's why the Germans are the Huns, and they look like gorillas and stuff like that. You got to kill them, and you see that 10 times over in come World War II.
yep. Then you have the Espionage and Sedition Acts, which are so unconstitutional, but nonetheless considered a war measure that is necessary for interfering with the war effort or for saying anything
And,
disloyal, profane, or
yeah,
abusive.
and but what is that? Like you can say, I don't believe in the war. Up, we're locking you up.
Yep,
Like that's some of the stuff that happened to people during this time, and it's very much just like flies in the face of the Constitution, freedom of speech, freedom of the press. But their ideas are saying this is for the war effort. This is for the ideally they're saying this is for the greater good, right?
yep, yep. And a lot of them actually target socialists and labor
Oh,
leaders as
absolutely, yeah.
like because you're
So
speaking against the war. How could you
yes,
do that? That's not patriotic. Um, there also another thing that happens during this time is the Great Migration, where you have a
yes.
large scale movement of hundreds of thousands of Southern blacks move from the South to the cities in the North and promises of new jobs. And you kind of this kind of creates overcrowding in the North and kind of intensifies racial tensions, like kind of in the civil rights movement
A
in
small one in the
1950s
north
and
at the time, yeah.
60s. Women in the war, I think again, same thing.
Oh
This is
yes,
like a
yes.
precursor to what happens in World War II.
If
You
they're going
have
to go to work,
women,
they're going to work in the factories. They're going to be nurses on the battlefield.
yeah,
It's a much smaller level simply because the war ends
so
within
quickly.
14 months after we get involved.
Yeah,
Um, but it's again, like you said, it's set in the blueprint. You have you have what works and what doesn't. We kind of have a working knowledge of how we're going to do this 20 years later.
yeah. And to kind of finish this up, just so we're on the same page here, the war ends officially for the United States. Woodrow Wilson presents his idea of 14 points, right, to Congress. Um, and Woodrow's 14 points was basically outlined specific proposals for peace. He marked his whole new philosophy of foreign policy and that like a democratic nation should be based on a sense of morality, not just national interest. And it was these goals to make sure that there's never another war.
And
This,
they could have worked. They just don't get
yeah,
signed. I
yeah,
mean,
and
they look good on paper, I guess we could say.
exactly. And the two major aspects of this was self determination, which is the right of people to choose their own political status. And the other one was the League of Nations, which would basically provide like a forum for nations to discuss and settle their differences without having to resort to war. The problem is that the League of Nations didn't have a military backbone to enforce it if
Well, it was
anyone
more
did
than just
something that
that
was
too. Yeah.
wrong.
Also, the United States doesn't join it, and
And
that's
that's my
something you have
point.
to
Yep.
stand. Like we'll talk a lot about the Treaty of Versailles another time, I guess. But like, the United
Yeah.
States does not sign the Treaty of Versailles. We don't
Nope.
sign it. We have our own separate peace with Germany because if Wilson's 14 points, we support 13 of them. We do not support the idea of a League of Nations because we think that's going to pull us into a war. And
Yep.
at this point, the United States is a powerful country because we're kind of the only creditor nation out there for the most part, right? Like a big time nation.
Yep.
We do have a large military now coming home from the war, and we're also our home front was not bombed during the war at all; it wasn't damaged.
Yep.
So we're ready to go. That's one reason why the Roaring Twenties becomes the Roaring Twenties because of all of our success in World War One. So I always kind of say, like the League of Nations is basically great on paper, but it's kind of like the Justice League without Superman.
Yep.
Like how
That's
are
the
you?
point.
Is it really going to? What's it going to do? It has some backbone, but really, it's just what? It's just a guy in a bat suit driving around in a car. What's that really going to do in the big scheme of things when things get really bad? You know,
Yep.
nothing. So, and that's what the League of Nations was. It had no teeth. It had no big gun to really come in there and intimidate to stop people. And that's what it does. And when that's why it falls apart with Japan and everything like that 20 years later.
So yeah, I mean, I guess that pretty much. Wow, we did this in under an hour, dude. I mean, I am.
We could still go on for hours too,
Well, of
obviously,
course,
but
yeah. I mean, just again overview here.
that's overview.
Um,
This is just the quick hit. The quick hit.
yeah, but I'm impressed that we were able to do this in under an hour. If you ask me, this is pretty good. So this is in a nutshell the United States during or United States involvement in World War One.
Yeah, kind of the causes that brought them in. A little bit about why they fought in the war,
What they did.
what basically happened in the war, and how the war kind of changed the United States a lot
Yep.
because we're never the same after World War One. We try to go back to what we were before World War One. We do. We try to be more of an isolationist. We try to do everything that we were doing before, but it's just kind of hard. It's kind of hard to go back there. And then the Roaring Twenties obviously changes a lot. and then we hit with the Great Depression, and that's going to lead us into the world events that lead to the Second World War. Oh, that's right.
And
Our Hitler story. I have to do the Hitler story real fast, right?
yeah, you should. But before we get to Hitler's story, we should also say that there's no way ever that we could do U.S. involvement in World War II
No, no,
in
no,
under
no.
an hour.
It just wouldn't work. No.
It just would never work. All right, yeah, let's get up to the Hitler story because that one's pretty cool.
Well, basically, it goes to the story that actually, the story originated back in World War II, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was basically, there was this painting that Hitler sees, and it's this painting of a British soldier with his gun drawn on a German soldier, and him letting the German soldier leave, right?
Yeah,
And Hitler says, "Oh, that's me." Right. And
yeah,
the soldiers, basically what happens is September of 1918. It would kind of go down the lore of World War I history. This details are still unclear, but basically it's a British soldier by the name of Private Henry Taddy. Right. He's near a
mm-hmm.
French village, and he encounters a wounded German soldier and declines to shoot him. He decides not to shoot this guy. The guy's injured. He sees him. They kind of lock eyes, and he's like, "The war is coming to an end." This guy's like my age. I'm not going to shoot him. He lets him leave. And they find out later that that was actually a 21-year-old Lance Corporal by the name of Adolf Hitler.
Mm-hmm.
And they just say how different the world would be, or world events at very least would be, if Tandy would have just pulled the trigger and shot and killed Hitler right there. He just basically just didn't do it for whatever reason. He just says he looked in the guy's eyes. This guy was, he just kind of, why shoot him at this point? He's already beaten. He's defeated. Hitler winds up, spending the rest of the war in a coma shortly after this anyway. But he spares Hitler's life, and then look what happens.
Crazy.
I just thought that's one of those things. Is just like I remember bringing it up to the students, and I think they did kind of a reenacting on it when History Channel did that World Wars documentary, right? And they spanned when they did the World War I and World War II as one World War. It came out maybe like, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago. It's really well done. They followed lives like Hitler, Churchill, Stalin, Roosevelt, Patton, a few others.
That was a great docuseries.
The
World
was
was it a world? No, it wasn't World War.
It was
that
called
was 1970s.
this one was called the World Wars.
Yep, that's what it was.
And it did like kind of up until World War I, then it did World War I, then it did like the interwar years, and then it did World War II, and everything went World War II. Kind of these how their lives, certain individuals how their lives span those major events, and they show this guy he could have shot Hitler, and he just doesn't, and he just didn't shoot him, and that changed world events because if Hitler dies, it would have just been another name on a list. Adolf Hitler, Lance Corporal, 29, killed September 28th, 1918. How that would have changed world events.
That's right.
So it's like the hot dog cart changed world events and made World War I happen as we know it. If Tandy just shoots Hitler there, okay, things are much different.
This concludes our episode on, United States in World War One. We will not be doing United States in World War II as a whole episode. That's not going to happen. However, we might do some stuff here and there
at some point.
We have to get into talking about some Saving Private Ryan and World War II movies. That's always on an agenda here. We just never get to it. Someday. Well, nonetheless, everyone, thank you so much for tuning in once again to our podcast. We greatly appreciate it. And wherever you do listen to this podcast, do not forget to hit subscribe and leave us a review if you enjoy this. And as I always say, if you don't, then please do not leave us a review. So I hope everyone free speech, right? So I hope everyone has an amazing week, and I hope you guys tune in again next week to listen to our next podcast. Thank you so much.
Stay safe, everybody.
I hope everyone enjoyed our podcast, and if you would like to email us, you can do so at historyteacherspodcast@gmail.com.